you know, this kind of reminded me of the point that I sent you guys for our behind the keyboard segment. Because this whole Bruin season, what did we hear? We heard that the roster is, uh, it's a mess. Everybody hates each other. Everybody hates Marchand. Pasternak, and it's feuding. And then you fast forward to near the trade deadline, and Charlie Coyle's in tears, and Marchand's in tears, and all these guys, and um, you know, it, I was reading, earlier about a Major League Baseball players survey that was done by the Athletic before the season. I should note. And what's the story right now about the Red Sox? That Cora hates Breslow. No one in the clubhouse is believes in the direction of the organization. This, that, and the other thing. And I thought it was very revealing that in this survey about what team would you know do you have positive or negative opinions of? Zero of the players said they had any negative opinions of the Red Sox. And it just kind of brought back from when I remember covering the Celtics that for a lot of years those teams for a couple of years those teams were not very good. Even when they did have Pearson, Ray, and Garnett, it was like, okay, well, are they starting to hate each other? Is it impacting their play on the court? Um, and one thing I learned from that is that stuff is never all one way or the other, the way that it is kind of perceived as a fan. That it's like, oh, so and so doesn't like this guy, so he can't play with him anymore, or that's why they're losing. And it's just like that's your office. If you happen to be a professional football player, the locker room is your office. There's guys in there that you get along with. There's guys in there that you would never hang out with off the field, but you still get a job done. And just because like something is bad here doesn't mean the whole thing is bad. And on the flip side, just because you guys maybe are going and playing shuffleboard doesn't necessarily mean that everything is rosy. So I was interested to get your guys' thoughts. Maybe if you have any examples that came to mind from your guys' own experience.
So I I agree with the premise that those types of things can be overstated. As it relates to the Red Sox, I will say like this is a point that we've talked about, but like I think that kind of substantiates the theory that teams should be a little more forthright because the truth almost never seems to be as bad as like whatever the fan conjecture is. I mean, sometimes it is, but it's like teams are so afraid of optics or whatever that's like, hey, if you just come right out with whatever it is, whether it's we stink, etc., then people take that better. People like to be taken seriously.
Yeah,
But
you
as far
assume
as
the
the
worst
specific,
if you have no information.
yeah, exactly. So it's like I don't necessarily think that there's this huge fracture between Cora and Breslow, but if you look at all the pieces, I can certainly understand why someone, in the absence of anything from either of those parties, would arrive at the conclusion that hey, maybe things aren't great for them. One example I remember though was the day after Jake DeBrusk requested a trade. Um, what years? That was 2019. I think that was the fall of 2019. I was at Warrior the next day, and they wisely had Bergeron come to the podium. So, post practice or whatever, DeBrusque obviously was out there. They weren't going to make him available, but he was there. And then they did the media thing, and it was like, I think that might have happened when Cassidy had COVID. And so I think Joe Sacco actually had to answer for that. Maybe it was Cassidy, I forget. But and then Bergeron answered for it. But you walk in and it was like Bergeron seemed pretty unmoved by it. Like all the players in the locker room, like I I remember sitting looking at Twitter and looking at all the reactions when that came out, and it felt like a big deal. It felt like, oh man, there's gonna be like fallout. It's gonna be weird. It's gonna be this. It's gonna be that. And it was like kind of felt like a normal day. It was like there was a little more, you know, writing focus on that topic, but it's not like there was like this palpable tension or something like that. And granted, you hear stories about teams where it is like that. You walk in the locker room and it is icy based on certain situations. But even when there is chaos surrounding teams, sometimes it's kind of funny to walk into the locker room and be like, if there is chaos, it's not palpable.
One time I can recall, I didn't cover this team on a regular basis. I don't actually remember how many times I got down there that year, so it's not like I knew about it, but I do remember the the story kind of happening was when the one season. It's funny just in hindsight. The Red Sox had Bobby Valentine, and it was he said something about Euclid, and then Pedroia. I think it was Euclid, and then I think it was Pedroia who said, we don't do that here, and it's like right out in the open, undermining his boss. I think that was on Marathon Monday too, so it was like 8:30 in the morning, and it's like, all right, here we go. This thing is so like, but like the fact that I can recall that one very specific instant does kind of speak to, and you hear stuff too. Like that's the other thing is like being around either, you don't even have to be around a team, just being in the industry and being in the business. You hear stories about, you know, some more salacious than others, but a lot of like basically workplace gossip. And 3% of that gets out in a meaningful way. And like you take the 2011 Red Sox, for example, like nobody knew any of the chicken and beer stuff until it was in the Holler story in the Globe. So like that, it's a lot of, I think Logan made a good point about like what seems massive on the outside isn't always as important on the inside for a variety of reasons. I think one of them is like these guys make too much money to give two shits about what you care about their drama, and also like these are, they're freak athletes, but they're also very mentally strong, and like that kind of plays up more often than not. I think there's the whole like the Belichick thing, like the ignore the outside or the noise or whatever it is, like that is easier said than done. But if you can lock into that, that's how you build an outstanding culture, especially in professional sports. So it is funny when you start like applying your like, what does this look like in my day-to-day job? And it becomes wildly trivial. And you're like, why would anybody actually care what me and the guy in accounting, the awkward conversation we had in the break room earlier? So like, it's just, that's their job. That's their office.
Yeah, I mean, to use
Well,
a
it's
Patriots
like
example, it's like last year, right, when all this stuff was going down with Mayo. There's a lot of reporting that stuff is, crumbling, and then there's also a report that like from such and such player saying like, oh yeah, no, Mayo's great. He's or someone else saying maybe Mayo's not perfect, but he's put in an unwinnable situation. And there you can be like, well, wait, which one? These are conflicting, and like they're not necessarily conflicting. Multiple things can be
Yeah.
true. He can be an absolute disaster as a coach. He can also have some people who kind of like him, and he can also have people who think he was put in bad situations. Like it's very rare that you're going to get 70 guys that are all in upright revolt
And
against
even
one person. So yeah,
even then, it doesn't always come out until like it starts affecting guys' money too.
yep.
So like if you're playing every day and you're getting your opportunities, like I'm not gonna rock the boat. I'm gonna that's why like I think the Mayo stuff started coming out once they really hit rock bottom, because it's like I gotta start looking out for my next job, and like I don't want to be associated with this. So yeah, we'll leak this. I don't give a shit.
yeah, it is. It is just an office like that. Really, I think that's the best way to put it. That people don't realize it because of the scale of it and all the money that everyone's making. But it's like, you know, Mike, when we worked together, how many times would I text you like complaining about something, but the next day my happy ass was still at the office. I was still going to try. Like you and I were fine. Like there's no issue with you and me or whatever. And so it was like, yeah, the life went on, and I think that really is how it is. Like Jake DeBrusk wanting a trade. It's like, okay, he's tired of his boss and he wants to go somewhere else. Not how I felt about you, Ben. Don't worry. But
I'm sure there were days.
like that,
You left. Shortly
there were
after.
days, sure, but but it's like that is a very human thing. And so it's when it's like, oh my god, he wants to force his way out, it's going to create this fracture. It's like that's not how it works anywhere. Like this really is no different.
Also, like if somebody's coming up to me after work every day and being like, "So how'd it go today? What'd you see out there?" And what's the vibe like in the cubes?
Like I
Like,
don't freaking
I
know.
well, like that's the thing. All I want to do is just go home. Like, so I'm not gonna sit there and be like, "Let me tell you what Logan said about Ben." Like, because then that's just gonna create a firestorm of just other stuff I have to deal with too. So like the path of least resistance can't be understated with these guys, where it's just like the last thing they want to do is talk to Logan Mullen, and so like they're not going to make that any more difficult for themselves, because if they do, like if I say something tomorrow that's going to cause headlines, I got to then address the headlines the next day, and all of a sudden it's like this is just annoying. And especially if I'm trying to be good at a job that is extremely difficult, I don't want to complicate that any more than it has to be.
It is kind of funny to think about if
That'd be hilarious.
Someone comes up to you and is like, "How do you think that Logan feels about being put on that project?" You're like, "I don't freaking know."
I know, right?
Okay.
I just like the idea of like doing a press conference in like the break room or something, just drinking out of like drinking coffee or tea out of a paper cup, like nibbling on a yogurt I bought at Target an hour earlier, just being like, in between questions, I'm pulling up my phone, checking Waze to see how long it's going to take me to drive home. Like, just kind of meshing those two worlds together is a hilarious idea.
All that being said, there were some days where I feel like a press conference would have been warranted, or at least a little entertaining.
Well,
How
that's
things go out there today.
Because like,
let me
I
tell
was
you.
about to say they call those company town halls, and you never learn anymore.
But like, no, like if that affects you, there is something to that too. Like, not to get too narrowed in on, but like you want to control the narrative, and that's why guys do talk sometimes. It's like, well, this isn't my fault. Like, let me tell you that. I might not be explicit about it, but let me just tell you why. So like, yeah, Ben, if you get your ass chewed out over something, you'd be like, well, don't look at me. Like, this guy did something else over here. There's a release in that must be extremely gratifying and just very helpful for your mental health.
Perfect.
Wasn't my decision. Go talk to that guy.
Oh yeah, that's the great one. I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
Yeah.
And I did, and he told me to pound sand.
We all have a job to do. I'm just trying to do my job.
And